Can you believe that we went over a year without any MCU content? Seriously, between 2008 and 2019, we had a new addition to the MCU every year. That's insane. That doesn't happen. How did we get here? Oh, hello there. I'm Bryson. It's nice to meet you. Welcome to Tape Slate Crew, where we post things we won't post on our main channel. Subscribe. Why am I here today? Well, I've been wanting to start posting on this channel for quite some time, and recently I've had a stroke of inspiration. I have a lot of thoughts about the fourth phase of the MCU, as I'm sure those of you watching this video do as well, and I wanted to share them with you. What gives me the right to do so? Not a damn thing. But here we are. Today I embark on a journey of reviewing Phase 4's addition to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Or is it the Marvel Cinematic Multiverse now? It's kind of confusing. There will be spoilers ahead for those of you who haven't seen any of these projects. Timestamps are in the description, so if you want to skip to any section, feel free. This video is part 1 of 4, where I will be diving into WandaVision, the Falcon and Winter Soldier, as well as Loki and Black Widow. Let's get started with the first addition to the MCU since Avengers Endgame. WandaVision was an interesting experience. Having been starved of Marvel content for over a year, my consumer brain was itching for more. What happens next, the world was wondering. What happened to our beloved characters after the events of Avengers Endgame? Is Marvel going to change things up and keep it interesting, or are they going to release the same old thing again and again and again?
Until we're both dead.
Kinda.
You can't control me the way you do them.
Can't I?
I'm not gonna lie, I was actually really looking forward to WandaVision. It looked extremely interesting from the get-go. When I first heard it was happening, I had no idea what to expect, as I'm sure you didn't either. It's such an out-there concept that I think most of us were really going in blind. Vision was dead, so after seeing the trailers in their 50s glory, what the hell was happening? What kind of madness was this going to unleash? It turns out, WandaVision, in my opinion, was an interesting show with very interesting ideas, but it just wasn't executed properly. From a filmmaking perspective, this was definitely unique in its earlier episodes. It definitely stood out from the rest of the MCU, but I really think the show falls flat in the later episodes. I did really enjoy how they established Wanda as a force to be reckoned with. She's not just this scared kid we saw in Age of Ultron. There was a lot of development for Wanda leading up to Endgame, and she was clearly stricken with grief in that film, so WandaVision seemed like the natural progression of things. Kind of. I do think that the show did a lot to benefit the character. Now hang on.
I wish it could be that simple.
Let me finish. She became a lot more interesting and psychotic at the same time. I feel bad for her, I do. I feel like the show was a little tone deaf with the way it handled what she was doing in Westview. Particularly with Monica Rambeau's line in the final episode.
No. Don't make me hurt you.
What?
I mean, I get that Wanda's family was real to her. I also firmly believe that Wanda didn't even know what she was doing until later in the show. But she still held an entire town hostage to keep her fantasy alive. Even after she realized what she was doing, she didn't change her ways.
Stop lying to me!
All of this is for us. So let me handle it.
What is outside of Westview?
You don't want to know, I promise you.
You don't get to make that choice for me, Wanda!
Which, if you're gonna make Wanda a villain, I totally understand. I get it. Take her out of the comics, that's totally a fine thing to do. I really hope that the future MCU deals with this a lot more nicely. To be honest, I think the show would have worked a lot more if it focused on Wanda's turn to the dark side, as opposed to keeping her the hero of the story. I actually had a thought while watching. I literally stopped and turned to the friend I was watching it with and said, hang on. Is she the villain of this show? One could argue that, but I don't think the show could comprehend that thought. It could have been a lot more interesting if they took this approach. That's all I'm saying. I could go into the finale of WandaVision, but I feel like it's been beaten on enough. It's the same Marvel final act battle trope.
Wow, that is so lame.
I will say I did enjoy seeing White Vision have an existential crisis over the ship of Theseus thing. That was a cool touch. I also can't talk about the show and not mention the missed opportunities. Like, come on. You brought in Evan Peters, one of the best actors working right now, and you're going to use him for a boner joke?
Boner.
I really hope he gets his time in the spotlight in a future MCU project, but I doubt it. And if he doesn't, he'll be fine. Trust me. I was really hoping for a Multiverse of Madness cameo, but that movie is filled with missed opportunities and pain. We'll get there. Objectively speaking, it has a lot of flaws, but it's not atrocious. The final episode is really where it falls apart. That finale was just very bland. I'll give it a 6 out of 10. I was looking forward to seeing the Scarlet Witch in Multiverse of Madness. It seems like this show was trying to expand the anti-hero side of her character, but they were definitely a little tone deaf, as I mentioned previously. My score for the show could be higher, but that finale really just fell flat and just kind of left a bad taste in the mouth. I cannot say that about... Holy Christ, this show was bad. It's a 6-part show, meaning in theory, every 2 episodes is an act of a 3-act structure. I remember watching the end of episode 2 and going, wow, this is where we are. What a joke. Nothing really happens in this show, and to be honest, I don't really remember much about it. I'm trying to get my thoughts out on it, but all I think of when I think of the show is TV static, because that's essentially what it is. I think the characterization of Bucky, Sam's relationship with Isaiah Bradley, though underdeveloped, and a few standout scenes are really the only redeeming story arcs here. US Agent also has some great scenes, and I can tell that the show had some great potential and some interesting ideas, but the overall plot just seemed entirely flawed and discombobulated. There's been some information circling around the internet that this show went through some major production whiplash due to the original plot being a little too close to a certain world event. And this is definitely what it feels like. It feels like there are scenes missing, plot lines deleted, and feelings that the show wanted to convey but were definitely not conveyed.
Terrorists only set us back a bit.
You have to stop calling them terrorists.
There were still people in there.
This is the only language these people understand.
I think this show is the first victim of Marvel's dedication to pushing out content at an unruly pace. I know it would have cost them even more money to completely rewrite and reshoot the entire show, but it may have been worth it here. Because now our introduction to the new Captain America feels lackluster and boring. Seriously, they spent an entire episode on Sam and Bucky fixing Sam's family boat. Also, are you seriously going to tell me that Tony Stark, the infant quintillion billionaire, did not pay the Avengers for their time? And even if he didn't, Sam Wilson is a hyper-unique, highly skilled military pilot who possesses a specialized flight suit that only he is capable of using, so we've seen. And he's shown being contracted out to special ops missions. But he's broke? He can't help his family fix the boat? I just don't get it. Zemo is totally in character during the show. It was a very nice touch to even show that he understands that Steve Rogers is a good man, though he doesn't like super soldiers. I also did like that Sam didn't take the super soldier serum. Like, he doesn't need it, and he shouldn't have it in this continuity. Overall, this show was pretty much an anticlimactic bore fest that should have spent a lot more time in the editing room, soundstage, and writer's room to come out with something more solid. I would rate this show a 4 out of 10, probably a 3, but, you know, yeah, 4's a little too generous. Let's go with a 3. There was just so much potential and so much opportunity wasted with this one. Gosh, why does that sound familiar? I'm getting ahead of myself. What we actually have next is... Loki is a mixed one for me. I'd be lying if I told you I hated this show or even disliked it. I actually enjoyed this one quite a bit, but it just really got me thinking. Would this have been better as a movie? You could say the same for a lot of these Disney Plus shows, and honestly this show is not the best example to that argument. But the show has fluff. Episode 3 is almost entirely unfocused fluff. Sure, it dives into the characters a hair and establishes the relationship stakes going forward, but I think this time would have been utilized better if they explained more of the mechanics of the TVA to smooth out the inconsistencies. To speak more on the inconsistencies, it seems like the show just doesn't know what world it's set in. The whole idea of a sacred timeline doesn't work when there's been a multiverse acknowledged in previous installments of the MCU. This may just be a MCU problem. It still doesn't remember that fact in future work. I'm getting ahead of myself again. Gosh. My interpretation of the sacred timeline is that it's actually a weave of sacred timelines. However, this is not explicitly said and only shown by one shot in the opening of the final episode. I saw an interview somewhere from showrunner Michael Waldron where he explains that this is actually what the intention was, but it's just not supported anywhere else in the narrative. He explained that the sacred timeline is more of a rope than a single strand. This explanation allows for the multiverse to exist without going too far off the rails, but I can't help but think that this could have just been a simple line of dialogue or even a word change that could have been thrown out in this show, but it's not there, aside from that one shot that I mentioned previously. Another interpretation that I took from Loki is that the TVA was preventing timelines that would eventually lead to a variant of Kang the Conqueror. This makes sense. This allows for the world to not be pruned as soon as Loki was born as a girl or an alligator. I really hope that season 2 of Loki dives into the mechanics of the TVA a little bit more to fix this break in the world building, especially because this entire saga now hinges on the multiverse being a primary factor, as it's called the multiverse saga. I don't have many more thoughts on Loki aside from what I mentioned here. I could go into more plot holes and inconsistencies with the broader MCU, but there's so many video essays about these topics, so I'll leave it to you to watch those if you would like to hear more about them.
No. If you won't go over them, then I will.
Hey, whoa, what are you doing in my video?
Loki is the show we had the biggest difference in opinion on, and I'm here to give my much more cynical take.
I don't know if we have time for that.
Loki is a show that initially entertained me, but if you look more closely at any aspect of the script, it falls apart completely. Loki's character is utterly broken in the show. The show had access to 2012 Loki, but wanted to use his more heroic 2018 counterpart without putting in the 5 films of work. This is accomplished by showing him a montage of all of his MCU exploits. This is the equivalent of the Avengers showing Thanos that episode of What If where he's a good guy and expecting him to give up the stones and be like, yeah, I want to be good now. It just doesn't work like that. The same Loki who wanted to enslave an entire planet simply because he saw himself above them is now saying they're going to leave these people to die. His powers are as inconsistent as his character. He's able to stop this falling skyscraper but can't win a fight against a redneck in a shopping mall. The most creative use of his powers in the show was summoning a blanket because the poor frost giant got chilly. The time travel in the show is also nonsensical. The TVA is outside of time, yet time still passes concurrently to Loki's adventure throughout the show in the TVA. Loki is arrested for the split timeline caused in Avengers Endgame because the Avengers were supposed to do what they did, but the timelines still need pruned from the events they caused directly. The Infinity Stones don't work in the TVA despite being shown to work outside of their home timeline in Endgame, unlike the comics. Loki establishes the entirety of the MCU up to this point was without free will. This means any heroic choices weren't made for character reasons, but instead there were actually infinite versions of that choice, and we just saw the ones the TVA happened to select. It's revealed that pruned timelines are sent to the end of time, even though time still flows there, even though it's the end of time. The timelines are sent there in their entirety, as evidenced by entire boats and buildings being sent there and being seen in the background. Yet Loki, Mobius, and Sylvie all manage to find each other right away. A smoke monster guards Kang's castle at the end of time, but then is shown to be outside of the timeline, not at the end of it. None of the end of time stuff really makes sense. It's a location, but also it's a time. Time flows in Kang's castle, and when Sylvie stabs him, the multiverse had already been unleashed. Wouldn't that mean that there's a alternate multiverse where she chose not to stab him? If that's the case, then that universe would go on having a TVA pruning the timeline where she didn't stab him, so Loki's script fails at writing its characters, power levels, and introducing massive world-changing mechanics with absolutely no internal consistency, all of which will become too common for all of Phase 4.
Is he gone? Is it over? Overall, I would give Loki a solid 7 out of 10. It has a really great cast, was visually stunning, which is harder to come by these days, and like I said at the beginning, I enjoyed it with the plot holes aside. This show really seems like it knew what it wanted to be from the get-go, and didn't really have too many production delays or reshoots that impacted the story, such as Falcon and the Winter Soldier. I was thinking of a segue here, but I'll just get this out of the way. This movie should have existed long ago. Like, ages ago. Natasha Romanoff as a character was so compelling, and this movie being a prequel to her death really undercuts her story arc. While I think she should have gotten a movie long ago, making a movie about her now just doesn't do the character justice. Sure, the cast is great, and the movie has some good scenes, but it just feels like generic super spy movie, and doesn't even remotely climb to the heights of Winter Soldier or Civil War. The elephant in the room on this one would be that her whole motivation in Endgame is that the Avengers are her family. Her only family, as she had no one left. The inconsistency is pretty much a game changer. Why do I get the feeling that the MCU writers don't talk to each other anymore and instead just go about making their own thing with zero thought in execution of simultaneous storylines? Biggest problem that I have with this movie, though, is the ending. Do I even need to say how discombobulated this feels? She just gets away somehow. I just don't buy it. I'm not saying Natasha couldn't get away. No. But not showing it just feels rushed and wrong. They even shot a scene between Natasha and the great William Hurt, showing how this interaction played out. But they cut it out to leave it up to the audience's interpretation. Okay, I get it. Leave it up for interpretation if you want to, but you can tell that this movie wasn't written this way. It just feels like there's something missing. Okay, what's left to go over? Florence Pugh is great.
It was real to me. You are my mother. You were my real mother. It was fake. And none of you told me.
Scarlett Johansson, as always, is great. I like the villain, despite his being alive is comparable to Palpatine. The opening is strong. Taskmaster is just a G.I. Joe. Red Guardian had so much potential, but instead is just a tub of lard in the third act.
That's it. Don't give me. Please sell me ideology.
You are an idiot.
Natasha killed the entire population of a prison. The CGI is abysmal at times. The scent thing is dumb. The action can be good, and the ending is rushed and feels disjointed. Overall, I can't say I hated it, but I feel like the biggest problem is that this movie should have come out in a different phase of the MCU. Which isn't inherently the movie's fault, but look. You missed your shot, so maybe this didn't need to be made? I'd be lying if I said I didn't enjoy any of it, because I did, but it's just average when it deserved to be so much better.
This was fun! No!
I'll give it a 5 or 6 out of 10. I can't really decide. And I could definitely rewatch it, but it just makes me a bit angry at times. So that was part 1 of 4 of my review of Phase 4 of the MCU. Next I'll be covering What If, Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, Eternals, and Hawkeye. I have a lot of thoughts, and I'm looking forward to sharing them with you. This is the first video of this type on the channel, and we'll be posting more like it as well as other related content, so drop a like and subscribe if you want to see more. Also, subscribe to our main channel where you can keep up to date with our creative projects. Earlier this month, we released Spade, our 48-hour film project for this year. Also, our original miniseries, Nightmares and Lullabies, is coming this winter, so go on and give the trailer a watch if you feel so inclined. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.